right. Hello, everybody. We're back with another episode of Goddess Bible Study. I'm Edward Dodge here. Um, LostGoddess.io. If you're interested, you can follow the blog at on the Substack on LostGoddess.io. And please like and subscribe and share and all that YouTube jazz. Pleased to have Lisa Adams here and Father Josh from the Apostate. If you guys want to say hello, say anything.
Hello, Ed. Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
Happy to be here.
Lisa, our resident priestess, and Father Joshua, our resident ex-priest. So
That's correct.
we're all on board here, and I'm the pseudo scholar. All right, so
I think you're done. I don't think you're so pseudo, Ed. Liking what I'm learning from you.
Well, thanks. So anyway, this is one of my favorite parts of when I started digging into all this goddess stuff and rereading the Bible. This was one of my favorite discoveries, was this chapter of Hosea, not in terms of like that I agreed with the content, but that it was from a goddess perspective, incredibly revealing, and something that no one really talks about this book. I mean, I'm sure one of these feminist scholars must have pointed it out somewhere in the things I was reading. I can't believe I completely came into this on my own, but really there's not much scholarship looking at the prophet Hosea from this goddess perspective, and Gomer as a Qedesha. I mean, I know I'm not completely original in coming up with this, but there's really not much being said on it. And I really found it to be incredibly revealing and really a colorful chapter, and one I've been excited to get into. And I like this image we got off of the AI. I think it really does a nice job of like illustrating how, at least I imagine these Qedeshas looking, because I do think they're veiled with colorful veils, and that the burqa, the Islamic burqa and stuff, is taken from these traditions. They made them black intentionally to make them not colorful, So any comments, or should I just jump on in? All right, we'll jump on in there. So we continue with one of the most colorful and pivotal chapters in the divorce saga of the Mother Goddess, the marital dispute between the prophet Hosea and his wife, the Qedesha Gomer. The biblical book of Hosea tells the story of the prophet who lived in Israel during the kingdom's final days. This short book reads on multiple levels between the prophet and his wife, Yahweh and Israel, and God and Goddess. Unfortunately, it is a heated argument that ultimately ends in divorce. Hosea is the first of the 12 minor prophets, and his book is considered one of the oldest texts in the Bible, thought to be written around 760 to 720 BC, so 8th century BC. And this is a time period when literacy has fully come back in. So we know that there's literate sources at this point. And the scholars think that this text is, I mean, it surely has edits and stuff that's been added on, but scholars do think that this is one of the oldest complete texts that really does date back to the 8th century, and that it really fits the context from, all the etymology that they do. So Hosea, so he's living in Israel, and Hosea preached doom for the nation of Israel, warning that if the people continued to follow their pagan worship and failed to turn completely to Yahweh, destruction would follow. And destruction does follow in 722 at the hand of the Assyrians. At the center of Hosea's story is his marriage to a woman named Gomer, described in the text as a woman of adultery. Gomer was most likely a Qedesha, though the text does not explicitly say so. At the very least, she was a matriarchal Canaanite woman, like an every woman, representing the society. So their marriage was contentious. Gomer bore 3 children, but only the first was fathered by Hosea. Gomer is typically regarded as a cheating wife and a sinful woman, an assumption rooted in the idea that her culture shared the same patriarchal norms of marital monogamy that we take for granted today. That assumption deserves to be challenged. Gomer is better understood as a representative of the broader society of her time, a Canaanite every woman, and most likely a holy woman of the Qedesha tradition, who would have had considerably more latitude in matters of sexuality and childbearing than an ordinary married woman. Qedesha were free to marry, but they were known to make difficult wives precisely because of their independence. In the allegory of the book, Gomer's adultery functions as a metaphor for the spiritual adultery of Israel, a nation that worshipped many gods and goddesses rather than Yahweh alone. The book of Hosea is a layered poetic allegory that operates on several levels simultaneously. It is a conversation between the prophet and his wife, between Yahweh and Israel, and Yahweh and Asherah. At its deepest level, this is the argument that leads to divorce. The final declaration and paperwork would come later with other prophets. Comments, or shall I jump in? All right, so this is Hosea 1. It's not a very long book. So when Yahweh began to speak through Hosea, Yahweh said to him, "Go marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her, for like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to Yahweh." So he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Then Yahweh said to Hosea, "Call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. In that day I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel." Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. Then Yahweh said to Hosea, "Call her Ruhumah, which means not loved, for I will no longer show love to Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love to Judah, and I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, or by horses and horsemen, but I, Yahweh their God, will save them." After she had weaned Ruhumah, Gomer had another son. Then Yahweh said, "Call him Lo Ami, which means not my people, for you are not my people, and I am not your God."
So
So,
here is where I have kind of a comment last question, if you will.
yep,
It in the last episode we spoke about Yehu and the work he did for Yahweh, and that he was very successful, and his sons went on to be the kings of Israel for what, 4 generations after
yeah,
him, is that right? Okay. But then all of a sudden here we're reading that God is angry with him, and
yeah,
so I'm like, what what's the turnabout here?
yeah. I mean, my interpretation, I do talk about a little bit in this text, is that my understanding, and from some of the biblical scholarship too, is that Jehu's massacre was just so bloodthirsty that it was just remembered with shame. That yes, he was a Yahwist, but it was his behavior was pretty shameful. Um, and so he's not remembered, and he was not purely monotheist. He was still a pagan Yahwist, so he still left up the golden calves and things. So he's not a perfect follower of Yahweh. He's a very flawed follower of Yahweh, and that this Jezreel, the blood spilling at Jezreel, was just so over the top that it couldn't be. It was not forgotten and not forgiven. Is my
It
understanding.
just, I mean, it seems as though once again we've got Yahweh who's kind of like back and forth with, what his commands are,
Right.
and not necessarily consistent, and clearly very bitter. Like, Yahweh is bitter, especially in that whole verse you just read, and I'm like, wow, way way to rise above. And you're supposed to be like God and
Right.
everything. And I just have to laugh at it and point out those inconsistencies.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that too when I read it, and I think that it is definitely notable. And I mean, I'm going to talk about it right here. So, the names of the three children are symbolic and carry the weight of this allegory. The first son is named Jezreel after the location of Jezebel's palace, the very place where the military commander Jehu massacred her family during his violent coup. The royal families of both Israel and Judah, and all the people and all the priests of Baal. So he massacres a lot of people. And though Jehu was a Yahwist, his treachery and bloodthirstiness were remembered with shame. Um, and yeah, I mean, Yahweh is commanding genocide and slaughter and kill all the Amalekites and all over the place. He's commanding, you know. So yes, it's not consistent, and maybe this is just Hosea's personal spin on things. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, but it definitely gets mentioned, and it's I mean, that's kind of why I wanted to do this week after last week's topic, because it does carry over from talking about Jezreel. And then there's another comment I'll get to later below that the name Jezreel actually means God plants or God sows. And so it comes into the taking over the regenerative powers of Mother Nature, which we'll get to down below. And this was the name of the one son that was born to Hosea, like whereas the other two children we're about to say were not born to him. There's some other fathers. So yeah, inconsistency is a hallmark, right? So the second and third children who belong to Gomer alone, because it doesn't say it's another father, but it doesn't say she bore him these sons. It just says she conceived and gave birth. On the first one, it says she bore him a son. And the next two, it does not say she bore him the sons. So the presumption is that they belong to other men, which is why they're all upset and why they're fighting. So they're not fathered by Hosea, and they're given the names not loved and not my people. Yahweh applies these names to Israel's children because they lack the proper father, and the names almost certainly reflect Hosea's own feelings towards his wife's children as well. The extended passage in Hosea 2 that we're going to come to is at its core a declaration of war against the goddess traditions. Rebuke your mother. Yahweh announces that he will put an end to the mother goddess celebrations, terminate her festivals, and punish the people for burning incense to Baal. The Yahwists want to shut down the goddess traditions entirely, and with them put the Qedesha out of business. The charge of bearing illegitimate children is leveled because the society practiced maternity rather than paternity. Lineages ran through the mother, not through the father, and the Yahwists found this intolerable. The story of Hosea and Gomer mirrors this conflict at the domestic level. Hosea seeks to end Gomer's independence, just as Yahweh seeks to end goddess worship and her nature festivals, her carousing, and her sexual rituals. When Hosea plans to shut Gomer in and cut off her from her lovers, it is simultaneously Yahweh declaring that the goddess will also have no lovers, that he intends to contain her. So one thing I didn't mention in the written text is that this speaks to the tradition of children being virgin born and women getting pregnant and saying that they're impregnated by the gods when we know full well biologically they had to get impregnated by somebody. And so you can presume, and certainly my thesis is that in a culture that routinely has women getting pregnant and ritual sex, that it becomes routine to just call these children virgin born and fathered by the gods, like Helen of Troy or Alexander the Great. Their mothers were like, "Yep, my husband, he didn't get me pregnant. uh, Somebody else did." So, and there's loads of examples of this among famous characters like I just mentioned, but other people as well. Um, and so I think that's what's happening. I think that these children of Gomer would have been coming out of the temple sex, and that they would have belonged to her, and she would have, if necessary, referred to them as being virgin born. At least they don't belong to her husband. So this is Hosea 2. It's a long passage here, but this is the money passage right here. This is the best part. Rebuke your mother, rebuke her, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. Let her remove the adulterous look from her face and the unfaithfulness from between her breasts. Otherwise, I will strip her naked and make her as bare as on the day she was born. I will make her like a desert, turn her into a parched land, and slay her with thirst. I will not show my love to her children, because they are the children of adultery. Their mother has been unfaithful and has conceived them in disgrace. She said, I will go after my lovers, who give me my food and my water, my wool and my linen, my olive oil and my drink. The wool and linen coming together, we talked about that, the shepherd and farmer and shepherd. Therefore, I will block her path with thorn bushes. I will wall her in so that she cannot find her way. She will chase after her lovers, but not catch them. She will look for them, but not find them. Then she will say, I will go back to my husband as at first, for then I was better off than now. She has not acknowledged that I was the one who gave her the grain, the new wine and oil, who lavished on her the silver and gold for which they used for Baal. Therefore, I will take away my grain when it ripens, and my new wine when it is ready. I will take back my wool and my linen, intended to cover her naked body. So now I will expose her lewdness before the eyes of her lovers. No one will take her out of my hands. I will stop all of her celebrations, her yearly festivals, her new moons, her Sabbath days, all her appointed festivals. I will ruin her vines and her fig trees, which she said were her pay from her lovers. I will make them a thicket, and wild animals will devour them. I will punish her for the days she burned incense to the Baals. She decked herself with rings and jewelry and went after her lovers, but me she forgot, declares Yahweh. Therefore, I am now going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. There I'll give her back her vineyards, and I will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. There she will respond as in the days of her youth, as in the day she came up out of Egypt. In that day, declares Yahweh, you will call me Ishi. You will no longer call me Bali. I will remove the names of the Baals from her lips. No longer will their names be invoked. All right, so let's pause there for a second.
Definitely. So there's a few things that I think about when I read that passage. And one thing is, I like if she's standing there like naked and lewd, I think back to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Um, and that's not necessarily a sin or lewdness to be naked, but in a different sense of one being naked, I also thought about the myth of Inanna when she goes down into the underworld and passes through the seven gates, where she is stripped of everything that makes her like who she is, that sort of like it confers that she's a queen and that she has certain powers and rights and gifts and so on. And I'm thinking about that this is sort of metaphorical for that, because when Inanna goes into the underworld and she is stripped of something important at each of these seven gates, she is left like for dead. Okay. And so metaphorically, that's really about like when we are stripped bare of everything that we think we are or everything we own, who are we really? And that there is a sort of a death, like an ego death process that occurs where afterwards you're in this place where you don't necessarily like know who you are anymore because all of these things have been taken from you. And so Yahweh is sort of talking about putting certainly not just Gomer, but the goddess and Asherah through that same process to like strip her of everything that makes her who she is. And I think it's also just speaks once again to what sort of like a jealous, bitter, sort of narcissistic God he is, if you will, because he's saying right here in this passage that he's going to manipulate her.
Right.
Right? He's going to allure her and like sort of promise all these things. And it's further narcissistic because it kind of sounds like love bombing. There's some love bombing in here. And
I mean,
that's classic.
yeah,
So
no,
anyway,
yeah, there's a lot there. It definitely speaks to like an abusive relationship,
yeah,
um, for sure. So, which is largely how I view monotheism as being like the religion of like an abusive, beating father who abuses his wife and children. And I think you see that very clearly in here. And yes, absolutely about stripping her naked to take her down to her complete vulnerability, to tear her down completely and then rebuild her in a new image. Give her new clothes, a different set of outfits that are completely redefine who she is. Maybe she goes from dressing very fun and seductively to dressing in a very dour and like handmade handmaiden's tale kind of way, or from a colorful veil to a black and white veil, or just a black veil, right? Um, you tear her down and then rebuild her in a new image, in a new fashion, with a new set of not just new set of clothes, but a new set of ideas and a new identity. Um, and yes, to tear her down and completely rebuild, like MK Ultra doing mind control or something, like some. Um, there's a lot of ways to look at it along those lines. I mean, this is a very deep I mean, there's a lot more beyond just Inanna. Like, I mean, yes, Inanna is a good example of this, but there's so many examples of where you would might see this in like in the practical world, in the real world, um, and um, and also just like how he's like, I gave you all those gifts, not them. Those were all mine, and she has not acknowledged that I was the one who gave her the grain and the new wine. Therefore, I will take it away. And
And the silver, when clearly that's all coming from the earth, from the goddess, right?
right, exactly. Oh, yes,
Um,
that's the takeover of nature too.
yeah. The other thing, and this is just nitpicky, but like Yahweh, you cannot make new moons go away. The moon is gonna cycle and it's gonna be new every 28 days, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Exactly. I will take away all of our appointed festivals. And I will ruin her vines and her fig trees. And the fig tree is a very important symbolism for the goddess. Um, which, when Jesus curses the fig tree is something we'll have to talk about when we get to that part, with Jesus. Um, but her vines, because the wine, the grains and the vines, they're all coming from Mother Nature, and then that in turn gives us the wine and the beer and the alcohol that feeds all the festivals. Um, and then I want to talk about this part where, therefore, now I'm going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. And therefore, I will give her back her vineyards and will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. Now, the valley of Achor is a reference. I looked it up. It was relevant to them back then, but it's not really relevant to us now. Um, and there she will respond as in the days of her youth, as in the day she came up out of Egypt. But yeah, this whole thing that like, oh, I'm going to speak real nicely to her and lead her back away and then like snatch her and like lock her in. Like literally, I mean, that's the way I totally read it. Um, like coming back to my house and like I'll be real nice, give you some gifts, and then like lock the doors and not let her out. Um, that is absolutely how I read this.
Absolutely. And I mean, it really is sort of like abusive. It's certainly controlling, and it's very deceptive and manipulative.
And it sets the tone for marriages going forward. And just the way the relationship between Zeus and Hera sets the tone for men and women's marriages in Western civilization. This is also setting the tone for what's acceptable. I mean, if this is acceptable for the way the prophet's going to teach his wife, then of course, like students of the Bible are going to read into this that it's acceptable ways to treat their wives. And it's totally abusive. It's totally controlling, manipulative, all of that.
Well, these are the archetypes. This is where we get our lessons from.
Exactly.
And this is the image that we are to emulate if we're made after the image and likeness of this God, this what we're reading here. So yeah, to emulate this would be very logical to do, right? Or you could make that argument.
I mean, the Greeks are very proud of their culture that they imposed marriages, the kind of marriage that as we understand them. One man to one woman, where the woman's expected to be monogamous, but the man isn't really so much expected to be monogamous. Um, but the woman definitely has to be monogamous to the man, and virginity is carefully protected and all that stuff. That was a Greek innovation that they were very proud of. Um, and because the previous cultures weren't doing that, because the previous cultures had these matriarchal traditions where the women's sex lives weren't controlled. And it's in the same time period. So I think that this, 8th century, um, this is like, because this is right at the very beginning of the Greeks too. Like the first Greek Olympics is right in this time period, like around 770 BC. And that's sort of like when you place Greek history on the map historically. It was with the first Olympics, and it's in this same century. And by the time we get Greek writings, they're talking about this stuff as though it's already happened, or they celebrate the imposition of what we consider a normal marriage. And no one's questioned it ever since. Like we just don't even question the idea of paternity in our culture. It's like just so deeply interwoven. No one even thinks that there's another alternative, because the academics are totally missing all this stuff. All the stuff I talk about this being a fight over paternity and maternity. The feminist scholars see it, but the contemporary critical scholars don't see it at all. And this is one of the things where I'm taking a very different tack than the contemporary scholarship on this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think this is clearly, and then we'll get into these other prophets that continue the fight, because the fight plays out for the next couple of centuries. So the language Yahweh uses. Oh, go ahead.
What's your you see the Baals is plural.
You're right. Yeah, well, because Baal is a plural god. I mean, there's lots of different Baals. There's Baal of this town, and Baal of that town, and Baal of the other town. But then it also can be used generically as a title Lord for entirely other gods, like Melkart from the Phoenician Melkart from Tyre was called Baal, just as a term, just like as just generic Lord. So like, just like we would call Apollo is a god, and then he's got the name Apollo, but we still call him the god Apollo. So you call him the Baal Melkart, if you wanted. But this is where the Yahweh cult is like, we don't want to be called Baal. We don't want to be merged with the other gods. We are separate and different from these other gods.
Yeah, but originally the word Baal was attributed to Yahweh early on. Probably. As a prefix. Yeah. And so like the Baals was like a general term, like we use the word Lord nowadays. It's not really specific, it's very general. And so these Baals would be like the local tribes gods, or
yeah,
exactly. Probably many. I know like Hadad was like one of the main ones, but there were many different.
Yeah, and that's because the whole beauty of the pagan traditions is that there's no centralized authority. So if you don't like the priesthood of one town, you just go down the way and set up a new altar and have a new priesthood and change the name of the gods or not change the name of the gods. Really kind of every community has their own license to do these things however they want. So you can see the parallels, but at the same time, there's endless nuanced differences just as you go right down the road. And so you got to harmonize it, understand that there's commonalities and distinctions endlessly. You've got to try to harmonize.
This is just a world of magic, because you have to imagine, if there's that many Baals, people are following after the Baals that had some kind of power to do something, or else they wouldn't be following them. Like we saw with Jezebel, with the calling down of the fire and that whole episode. There had to be an element of magic going on here, where one Baal was showing himself or herself himself more powerful than another, and gaining hegemony over another Baal of another tribe. It's just a bunch of warring gods going on, fighting over the girl.
So the language Yahweh uses here to describe the new order is telling, because he says, all right, I'll repeat this. In that day, declares Yahweh, you will call me Ishi. You will no longer call me Bali. I will remove the names of the Baals from her lips. No longer will their names be invoked. So Ishi means my husband, and this is like the Hebrew word they preferred for my husband. And Bali means my Lord. And so this would be a conversational, as we were saying, a conversational language that a wife would use with her husband. And the latter having been a conventional Canaanite greeting and term of devotion. So the Yahwist banned its use entirely, scrubbing even the word from acceptable speech. Unless you're going to say something like Baal-zebub, which means Lord of the Flies, and you can use it insultingly. So from there, Yahweh moved to absorb the powers of nature and creation that had belonged to the goddess, claiming them as his own. As we were saying, the word Jezreel means God plants or God sows, while also being the name of the town. So this is actually follows from the previous verse. In that day, I will make a covenant from them. I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, the birds of the sky, and the creatures that move along the ground. So I want to repeat this. In that day, I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, the birds in the sky, and the creatures that move along the ground. Well, why does he need to make a covenant of them? They already had a covenant with the mother goddess. The mother goddess is already the mistress of animals and the mistress of plants. Um, so this is very clearly Yahweh trying, or at least attempting, to grab those powers for himself. Um, Bow and sword and battle I will abolish from the land, so that all may lie down in safety. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge Yahweh. Um, In that day I will respond, declares Yahweh. I will respond to the skies, and they will respond to the earth. And the earth will respond to the grain, and the new wine, and the olive oil, and they will respond to Jezreel, to God plants. I will plant her for myself in the land. I will show my love to the one I called not my loved one. I will say to those called not my people, you are my people, and they will say, you are my God. Um, So yeah, I will respond to the skies. I will respond to the earth. The earth will respond to the grain and the new wine. And they will respond to Jezreel. I will plant her for myself in the land. So yes, more of the just taking over these powers by Yahweh.
It's more love bombing. And also it's like the love is clearly conditional,
Right.
right? It's not unconditional love. It's I get to do these things and like all this stuff has to happen. And then you'll be my beloved and you'll be my people. Which seems to be the theme ever since Yahweh came on the scene anyway.
Right. Very conditional. Yeah, do what I say or else I'm going to punish you. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it's like not just conditional, it's like extortion. Um, so so in the third chapter, Hosea approaches Gomer with valuables, barley and silver, since coinage did not yet exist, still a barter world, in an effort to win her back. These verses are often read as Hosea purchasing Gomer from another man, but the text does not explicitly say who received the payment. Given that the Qedesha were masters of their own behavior and kept the gifts they received in exchange for their favors, it seems more likely that Hosea gave the gifts directly to Gomer to win back her affection. He then tells her that she must be sexually faithful to him, and he pledges the same in return. The book does not record her response. This is very important. Gomer never speaks at all in the book. She never has a voice. For all the reader knows, Gomer may have demanded a divorce and left with the children, and she never appears again after this bit in chapter 3. So yeah, the fact that she never speaks, I think, is also really, really critical undertone of the whole book, that we never get to hear her opinions or thoughts on any of it. So Yahweh said to me, go show your love to your wife again, though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress. Love her as Yahweh loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love the sacred raisin cakes, meaning love me or else. Um, so I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and a lethek of barley. Then I told her, you are to live with me many days. You must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any man, and I will behave the same with you, same towards you. Um, so that's the last appearance of Gomer. And he just instructs her, you must be faithful to me. But like I said, we don't hear her response. We don't tell her here to like, oh, piss off. I'm out of here. I'm taking the kids and I'm gone. And then Hosea spends the next 10 chapters being pissing and moaning about it.
So I am thinking, and there's like further down that I feel like this continues to come up, but like from the moment Adam and Lilith split, you know, from that moment, this kind of behavior and attitude and so on towards women has been taking place
Hmm.
because Adam was trying to make Lilith be, subject to him. And Lilith was like, wait a minute, God made us both from the earth. Like we're made equal. And what the heck is going on here? And chose her own sovereignty like the Qedesha, um, and chose to leave Eden because she was like, I'm not going to be subject to you. This is ridiculous. So it's like this is a continued theme. And so the divorce started there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've mentioned this before, that to me is the original sin, was God and Adam turning their back on the first woman,
Right.
Lilith, right? And then it just continues to play out through the Bible. It's like over and over again, it's a pattern.
Yes. No, I frame, for me, the Garden of Eden story is the divorce papers. That's how I frame it. Like, that's the final, like, there's a series of prophets having, articulating these arguments, and then they write the Garden of Eden story, and that's the end. Um, that's the end for the ladies. And they write a bunch of laws in Deuteronomy saying your daughter will not be a Qedesha. Um, and they say, which I think are all contemporary to one another, late in the first temple period, around the time of Jeremiah, maybe the time of Ezekiel, but early in the exile. But it's in that time period where I place the Garden of Eden story getting written, which also is contemporary to Pandora for the Greeks, who's also the first woman, who's also the source of all men's troubles, who's also the excuse to lock all the women down, um, is Pandora. So Pandora and Eve play the exact same cultural role in these two contemporary societies.
Well, I mean, it's the Sumerian, which we've dug up and can read in the cuneiform. I mean, to your point, it's the goddess that, according to the story of Sumeria, the Garden of Eden story is a retelling of a more ancient story, probably by 1,000 years or more.
Certainly,
And so
the metaphors existed before, for sure.
the metaphor, and it was the goddess who was there to heal. I forget how the story goes. I should, but it's the goddess who takes the word rib is actually comes from the word life. It's not a rib in the Sumerian story, but it was the goddess that was going to heal um Inki, the god. And so it I mean the divorce with the goddess is can easily be made with the Garden of Eden story. But it was veiled to us up until, 150, 200 years ago, until we started digging this stuff up and can read, the telephone game of the Garden of Eden story uh, as it was originally told, and how the Israelite people would later retell that story. Both the effect of getting rid of the goddess, and of course, as that archetype diminished, so did women in society, as we can still see the remnants today.
Well, then ultimately, the Garden of Eden story gets framed as original sin, and that sex is the original sin,
Absolutely.
which is like the ultimate indignity of like, or like not even the ultimate indignity, but the ultimate like form of psychological manipulation that the church has used on all of us, on all of society, since Augustine, for the last 1,700 years. Because it's Augustine who comes up with that idea in the 300s. Um, that was his own unique contribution, was to reframe the Garden of Eden story is about sex and original sin. Like, nobody, my understanding is like that was not how Christians and Jews at the time understood the story. That if anything, they were kind of mystified by the whole Garden of Eden story. But then St. Augustine is the one who comes up with the original sin idea, which I think is really one of the most pernicious ideas to permeate society. The idea that, being, because I was just listening to some preachers online today talking of rehashing Adam's sin, and that, Jesus is born of a virgin because he's not born of Adam's sin. He never says the word sex, but that's clearly what he's talking about, because we're born of the flesh, and of sexual action is to be born sinful, to be born of sin. Um, you know, why would God make us this way and then make sex sinful? Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? It never made any sense. But it's a very effective form of manipulation that keeps people under control, keeps people feeling guilty. It's a way that the priesthood can abuse their authority to bash people over the head for just behaving normally. Um,
I mean, there should be somewhat of a really righteous anger for what's happened here. The retelling of the story, the inversion of the story to diminish the female, the goddess. I mean, we have every right to be very angry about this, you know? I mean, not to become, passionate on this podcast, but the more you look into this, it's just an absolute travesty that's gone on for a millennia or two. And it's just astounding. It's enough to get really angry. If you have like a story like the Garden of Eden where the woman is completely coming away from that story to be blamed, and people to this day will even blame the fact that she has a period on the fact that she ate the fruit. When you read these more ancient stories and it was the God who ate the forbidden fruit and then she tried to heal him. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And then to even claim that that ancient civilization, Babylon, is evil and should not be believed. I mean, we're in a very deep mind f.
Yeah, I mean,
I
I mean, it's so inverted.
yeah, I mean, look how many people are like damaged by their experience in the church.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You are come out of like they're raised in high control environments, Islam too, and are really psychologically damaged. Um, and the sexual purity culture, how many people struggle with their homosexuality, or with guilt about being homosexual, right? Because of like church teachings, or how many preachers are complete sexual hypocrites preaching sexual purity culture on the pulpit and then engaging in all sorts of all manner of sexual activities with prostitutes and
Part of the reason why they wanted to probably focus, and St. Augustine or Augustine would want to focus on controlling sex is because of how closely tied it is to, agrarian practices and paganism. Because it's all about fertility, the agricultural fertility and the fertility of your livestock and, your land, but also to procreate and keep your line um, going, to have descendants and so on. And so we know for sure that people were still practicing paganism, you know, and that included sexual acts. So, of course, that's going to be one more way to try to, like, control people and keep them down is by making them think that this thing that they love and that's so truly sacred and literally life giving is evil.
right. And
Yeah.
to control women and to like take away women's sexual powers because like men have the power of violence, like typically speaking your average man can beat up your average woman and has the power of violence over women, but women have the power of like beauty and sexual appeal to like control and manipulate men. And then I'm firmly in the belief that like a beautiful woman has as much power walking into a room as like a big strong guy. It's just a different type of power, and power being the ability to get people to do stuff they wouldn't otherwise want to do. A big strong man can threaten you to make you give her money that you wouldn't want to give him your money, and then but a beautiful woman can get you to give her money just by like being appealing, and don't have to touch you, Um, and it's not to say that's the only thing women are good for, but like it is a source of real genuine power that women have, sexuality and beauty, to influence men's behavior. They can get men completely wrapped around their fingers. Um, and they take it away. They take it away by like by slut shaming, basically. I mean, it's worked really well to like
But
disempower women.
the thing about that power, Ed, is not using it for manipulation, but using it as a power to heal,
Sure.
using sexual energy as life-giving power, using it to affect and communicate with like the elements and universal energies in order to create change. So it's really much more about magic and and like communion with all of nature and the
Yes,
universe.
thank you for saying that, and I do like does need to be clarified that I don't mean it just from a manipulative perspective. And same thing with strength. Men ideally you want your strong men to be using their strength for something good. Lifting heavy things for like the benefit of people, not using for violence and manipulation. These things can cut in both directions. So I think you can say the same things for for men and for women. But but thank you for saying that, because like I don't want to come off that like trying to like say women are sexually. I'm not trying to like reduce women to just the sexual thing, even though that is like super
No,
powerful.
because I mean, those narratives are what exactly all of this stuff is about, is that women are using sex to manipulate, where that's not necessarily the case.
Right.
It's a very rare situation when that is the case.
I don't think it's so rare. I think guys will routinely do favors for women just because they're pretty and because they smile at them. I think it's just such a day-to-day common occurrence, um, that, um,
Is it men
I mean,
taking
they
that
call it
upon
pretty girl
themselves,
privilege. I
or
mean
is it women using men to do that?
I
That's
mean,
the
I've
thing.
known pretty girls who talk about their pretty girl privilege and use pretty girl privilege to get through life. Um, like, girls get drinks at the bar all the time. I mean, just on a day-to-day basis, and
Then they're definitely not using their power, well, if they're using it to get drinks at the bar. Saying.
I mean, there's more to life than just this, but stuff. But I mean, it's a real source of getting people to do stuff for you. Um, so anyway, the dispute described in Hosea was not only a cosmic event between Yahweh and the goddess; it was a rupture within the human community itself, a divorce between men and women, between the Yahweh's priests and the priestesses, who were their own wives, daughters, and mothers. The sacred traditions these women carried had to be repressed and expelled. The book goes on without Gomer, and Hosea continues to complain of Israel's sins. Here he pledges to destroy your mother. Um, so this book chapter 4, I guess. You stumble day and night, and the prophets stumble with you. So I will destroy your mother. My people are destroyed from lack of knowledge. Because you rejected knowledge, I also reject you as my priests. Because you ignored the law of your God, I will also ignore your children. The more they multiplied, the more they sinned against me. They exchanged their glory for a thing of disgrace. They feed on the sins of my people and relish their wickedness. And it will be like people like priests. I will punish them both for their ways and repay them for their deeds. They will eat but not have enough. They will engage in prostitution but not flourish, because they have deserted Yahweh to give themselves to prostitution. Old wine and new wine take away their understanding. My people consult a wooden idol, and a diviner's rod speaks to them. A spirit of prostitution leads them astray. They are unfaithful to their God. They sacrifice on the mountaintops and burn offerings on the hills, under oak, poplar, and terebinth, where the shade is pleasant. Therefore your daughters turn to prostitution, and your daughters-in-law to adultery. I will not punish your daughters when they turn to prostitution, nor your daughters-in-law when they commit adultery, because the men themselves consort with harlots and sacrifice with Qedesha, translated as shrine prostitutes. A people without understanding will come to ruin. Though you, Israel, commit adultery, do not let Judah become guilty. So I think this is a funny one too, where it says, I will not punish your daughters when they turn to prostitution, because the men themselves consort with harlots and sacrifice with Qedesha. But again, more of this just I don't know if slander is the right word, but castigating these people for their behavior.
And this actually comes after the previous part where it's like, oh, I'm going to make this covenant with the land and the beasts,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm going to love you. So it comes after that.
Yeah, no, this is the next chapter. It's chapter 4.
So
And
like it's so back and forth.
yeah. No, there is a lot of back and forth. I mean, he does literally say, I'm going to punish you, and then he says, I'm not going to punish you, and I'll punish the men. Um,
Hmm.
but so I will destroy your mother, though, I think is a pretty clear, unambiguous line.
Yeah, I saw
Um,
you pulled that out and highlighted that. Yeah, it is.
Matricide, like how much is that? Like also, did people start thinking even that mothers were bad, or the
It,
I don't know.
this is
It's
matricide.
matricide.
I just looked this up. I'll read this to you if you're interested.
sure.
I asked Gemini. I said, "Tell me about the Sumerian story where Eve was the goddess." I'm going to read this to you. This is amazing. Um, okay. It says the story you are thinking of is found in the ancient Sumerian myth of Enki and Ninhursag, often
Right.
referred to by scholars as the Sumerian paradise myth. While the name Eve does not literally appear in the clay cuneiform tablets, this myth features a goddess named Ninti, who is widely recognized by historians and biblical scholars as the direct literary prototype and inspiration for the biblical figure of Eve. The parallels between the Sumerian story and the Garden of Eden narrative in Genesis are unmistakable, right down to a brilliant linguistic pun involving a rib and the giving of life. The setting is Dilmun, the Sumerian Eden. The story takes place in Dilmun, a pristine and sacred paradise land where there is no disease, no death, and no predators. It's described as a land of absolute purity. The chief water and wisdom god, Enki, arrives in Dilmun and turns it into a lush, fertile garden by unleashing fresh water from the deep underground aquifer called the Abzu. The conflict and the forbidden plants. In this paradise garden, the Earth Mother goddess Ninhursag co-creates and grows 8 miraculous sacred plants. Enki, exploring his newly watered garden, spots these beautiful plants. Driven by curiosity, he commands his two-faced messenger god, Izimud, to pluck them. Enki then eats the 8 forbidden plants, one by one. Ninhursag is furious, so the goddess is furious that Enki has consumed her creations without permission. This is a complete inversion. She pronounces a terrible death curse upon him, declaring, "Until he is dead, I shall not look upon him with the eye of life." She then vanishes from the scene. The illness and the dying rib. Because of the curse, Enki falls gravely ill. 8 of his internal organs begin to fail, each corresponding to one of the 8 forbidden plants he ate. The gods are in despair because if the god of water and wisdom dies, the cosmos will fall apart. Finally, a clever fox offers to find Ninhursag and bring her back. The fox succeeds, and a remorseful Ninhursag returns to heal the dying Enki. To cure his 8 failing body parts, Ninhursag creates 8 healing goddesses, birthing one for each specific ailment. When she asks Enki where it hurts, he cries out, "My rib," which is T. "My rib hurts me. My T hurts me." In response, Ninhursag creates and births a specific goddess to help heal his rib, naming her Ninti. The connection between the Sumerian goddess Ninti and the Hebrew Eve, Shavah, comes down to a brilliant Sumerian pun that evaporated when the story was later translated into Hebrew. In the Sumerian language, the word T has 2 entirely different meanings depending on how it is written. T means rib, and T means to make alive or life, which happens to be Eve's name is Zoe or life. So there's the pun there. Therefore, the name Ninti literally means simultaneously the lady of the rib and the lady who makes alive. For the Sumerians, she was a goddess born from a rib specifically designed to bring life back to a dying god. So when the authors of the Hebrew Bible were constructing the Genesis narrative centuries later, they drew heavily upon the imagery of the Mesopotamian paradise myths, the pristine garden, the fresh underground streams, and the forbidden plants, and the curse. However, the Hebrew language does not share this pun. In Hebrew, the word rib is Selah, and the word for life or living is Kai, or Zoe, I think. Because the double meaning was lost in translation, the Genesis writers split the 2 halves of the Sumerian goddess Ninti into 2 separate parts of the story. The rib, Eve is physically formed out of Adam's rib, and the life giver, Adam explicitly names his wife Eve, because she was the mother of all living. While the Sumerian story, this is the final paragraph, while the Sumerian story features a full pantheon where a powerful mother goddess creates a specialized deity to heal a broken male god, the biblical narrative adapts this material into a monotheistic framework. Ninti, the divine healer born of the rib, is transformed into Eve, the first human woman, reframed not as a cosmic goddess, but as a human partner, Isha, built from the side of a man to be his counterpart in the garden.
Right. Yes. And not born
Mic
of a
drop.
woman.
I mean, just, yeah. complete inversion. And so, like when we're reading all these stories and we're seeing Yahweh play this flip flop, all these. It is a narrative that's trying to just it's trying to fight like some truths of culture that just aren't there, and it's trying to establish itself, you know. And he's having to play where the writers are obviously having to play a lot of games to try to get this thing to work.
Yeah, they've got to take over, cultural understandings and cultural norms, cultural expressions, and invert them into and reframe them around this new thing, this new set of ideas. And we would be faced with the same problems now. If we wanted to create a new religion now, you'd have to use the language that people are accustomed to. You can't just come in with like flying spaghetti monster. Nobody would know what you're talking about. You got to use the language that would be relevant and resonant with the language people already know from their traditions we already have today. So any new tradition that comes in the 21st century or the 22nd century would necessarily have to draw from and reframe today's existing religions. And they're faced with that same thing. But the parallels you're drawing are totally apt, Joshua. I mean, it has been observed this the connection between those two stories, and it is. I mean, hell, we could do a whole talk on just that.
I think we should. I think we should, Ed. It's just
Well, we will get to the Garden of Eden story. We will have a
Mhm.
time to talk about that for sure. I mean,
Yeah,
I
it's
think
an
we have talked
incredible
about it.
thing.
We'll talk about it again when we get to when I think around the time of the exiles when I place it as getting written.
Mm.
So, yeah, let me get on with the rest of this before we
Sorry,
run
yeah,
time
no,
here.
I thought we were already. That's right.
No,
We
we're
got some
almost
ways
done
to go.
though. So this is the last bit of Hosea. They're unfaithful to Yahweh. They give birth to illegitimate children. When they celebrate their new moon feasts, he will devour their fields. The hostility towards the feminine divine runs through Hosea that runs through Hosea is not unique to him. It is a defining feature of all the biblical prophets, or many of them, of the biblical prophetic tradition. Other prophets of Yahweh would continue to use stark, often brutal sexual language to condemn Israel and Judah for their matriarchal and pagan ways. The Yahwists wanted to normalize the patriarchal family structure and eliminate older tribal customs that preceded it. The general hostility of the feminine divine pervades the biblical text, with the notable exception of the works attributed to King Solomon. The contrast with the Greek world is instructive. Both cultures imposed firm patriarchy and mandated marital monogamy for women. The Greeks reordered their Olympian pantheon and demoted the goddesses, subordinating them to Zeus and a male dominated divine hierarchy. The Yahwists went further. They eliminated the goddesses altogether. The erasure was so complete that the Hebrew language has no word for goddess at all. Interesting etymological. There is no word for goddess in the Hebrew language. So, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. The prophet Isaiah was a contemporary of Hosea and was active in Judah during the reigns of King Ahaz and Hezekiah in the 8th century BC. Like Hosea, Isaiah predicted doom for the Hebrews if they continued in their idolatrous ways, and his condemnations extend explicitly to women who enjoyed lives of independence and adornment. Isaiah's misogyny runs deep. It is not incidental to his theology. The subordination of women and the suppression of goddess worship are two sides of the same campaign. We will revisit all three of these prophets at length later on, but here's a sample to show the continuity with Hosea. So this is Isaiah. Yahweh says, the women of Zion are haughty, Zion being Jerusalem. The women of Zion are haughty, walking along with outstretched necks, flirting with their eyes, strutting along with swaying hips, with ornaments jingling on their ankles. Therefore, Yahweh will bring swords on the heads of the women of Zion. Yahweh will make their scalps bald. In that day, Yahweh will snatch away their finery, the bangles and headbands and crescent necklaces, the earrings and bracelets and veils, the headdresses and anklets and sashes, the perfume bottles and charms, the signet rings and nose rings, the fine robes and the capes of cloaks, the purses and mirrors, and the linen garments and tiaras and shawls. Instead of fragrance, there will be a stench. Instead of a sash, a rope. Instead of well dressed hair, baldness. Instead of fine clothing, sackcloth. Instead of beauty, branding. Your men will fall by the sword, your warriors in battle. The gates of Zion will lament and mourn. Destitute, she will sit on the ground. It's really horrible stuff. I think it's interesting how similar the women are back then are to women now in terms of like dressing up nice and wearing lots of jewelry and stuff. But obviously, this is really abusive. And, just imagine, Lisa, if the man came along and snatched off your jewelry and cut off all your hair and made you wear sackcloth instead of a beautiful, some beautiful outfit you wanted to wear.
It's a hatred of culture.
It's also a condemnation of beauty, and Isaiah sounds like an incel.
I know, right? I mean, you do see echoes of this kind of language in the modern day. There's no shortage of misogynistic language and people spouting deeply, deeply hateful things towards women. And they obviously don't get any good loving in their life if they hate women that much.
Many of them use different parts of the Bible to justify what they're saying, to like back up the claims that they make.
Well,
Yes, they do.
to the point, like in the tradition of like the Orthodox Church, that you would read like what happened to Saint John the Baptist. His murder was directly a result of a woman who was dressed in this kind of garb and, into the dancing and into the beautification that eventually allowed Herod's lust to run wild and to promise her whatever she wanted.
Right. Herod
And
Antipas, and he's the beautiful woman who's dancing for him. She's his niece or his daughter or something, and
yeah,
she said, "I'll give you anything you want, any favor you want of the king, I'll give it to you." And she demands the head of John the Baptist, which he was not expecting that demand, but he does it anyway. And so yes, one more example of beautiful women, alluring women being presented as uh, untrustworthy, villainous, scary.
yeah. And that tradition absolutely infected Western society, deeply entrenched,
Mhm.
to where like women who would participate in that, if in a very strongly Christian culture, would definitely be accused of participating in a sin that brought down the greatest prophet according to Christ. You know,
Right. And she has a name. The woman has a name. I forget her name, but yes, that
uh,
story gets. What's that?
yeah, I'm trying to remember.
But that story
Yeah,
gets told a lot. There was a
Herodia,
Netflix.
Herodia.
There's a Netflix document, I don't know, or something. They're doing Netflix doing a lot of dramatizations of Bible stories now, and they're doing some Jesus one, and that particular scene was really they really dressed it up,
Mm.
with the dancing, and then with the bringing the bloody head back, and they really emphasized that whole little narrative on this Netflix that
I mean,
not documentary, but
think of what that does. I mean, culture is so much of culture and beauty is dancing, and I mean, even as we've dig up these, ancient locations, we can still find remnants of like the jewelry, oh, of
right,
like, I mean, adornment has always been something of culture. What is it about Yahweh here that wants to stamp this out?
right.
Because it didn't come from him. I mean, what are we actually really dealing with here that he has such an issue with beautification? What
Beauty is power. I mean, that speaks to what I was saying before. Beauty is power, and you want
so
to
it's
take away
a
the power, take away the
mm.
beauty.
So
Um,
if he can take away the power of the women, he has more control over society to get society to do what he wants.
I mean, women are half of society, so like
No,
you
that's
started right
really
there.
insightful. That's really good. Never thought about that before. That's really good.
So here we got Jeremiah. He was a critical reformer. And we'll talk a lot about Jeremiah. He's very important. Who lived late in the first temple period under King Josiah and witnessed its destruction by the Babylonians. Jeremiah here issues the divorce papers and had the final argument about the Queen of Heaven as the people were all walking into exile with Jerusalem on fire behind them. So Jeremiah will come up later in the story. This is Jeremiah book 3, chapter 3. Have you seen what faithless Israel has done? She has gone up on every high hill and under every spreading tree and has committed adultery there. She saw that because faithless Israel has committed adultery, I gave her a certificate of divorce and sent her away. And that's the declaration of divorce that will then lead to the Garden of Eden being the divorce papers. And then the last one here let me just get through this one, and then we can just talk. The prophet Ezekiel lived in Judah during the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem and departed with the first wave of exiles. He begins prophesying in Babylon. So he's contemporary to Jeremiah. Like Hosea, Ezekiel makes extensive use of sexual language and imagery, women's bodies, infidelity, and prostitution serving as his primary metaphors for Israel's religious unfaithfulness. Yahweh called Ezekiel to prophesy against the exiled Israelites for their stubborn and obstinate behavior. Ezekiel accused Israel of breaking the covenant and warned that Jerusalem would be attacked again as a consequence. Among his targets were the women prophets, who can be understood as Qedesha, identifiable by the magic charms on their wrists and the veils that they wore. Ezekiel's charges against them are striking. He accused them of holding the powers of life and death, killing those who should not have died and sparing those who should not have lived, in direct defiance of Yahweh's judgment. This is not merely a condemnation of folk magic. It is an acknowledgement that these women wielded genuine spiritual authority the Yahwehs were determined to extinguish. Ezekiel's rebuke of the women is extensive and sexually graphic, and this is just a small sample. We will have a lot to say about Ezekiel, probably do a whole dedicated topic on just Ezekiel. Some of the most sexual content is Ezekiel. So, woe to the women. This is Ezekiel 13, 18 to 21. Woe to the women who sew magic charms on all their wrists and make veils of various lengths for their heads in order to ensnare people. Will you ensnare the lives of my people, but preserve your own? You have profaned me among my people for a few handfuls of barley and scraps of bread. By lying to my people who listen to lies, you have killed those who should not have died and have spared those who should not live. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Yahweh says. Sovereign Yahweh, I am against your magic charms with which you ensnare people like birds, and I will tear them from your arms. I will set free the people that you ensnare like birds. I will tear off your veils and save my people from your hands, and they will no longer fall prey to your power. Then you will know that I am Yahweh. Because you disheartened the righteous with your lies, when I had brought them no grief, and because you encouraged the wicked not to turn from the evil ways and so save their lives, therefore you will no longer see false visions or practice divination. I will save my people from your hands, and then you will know that I am Yahweh. All right. So that's the last of what I've got. So this one
Doesn't it seem as though he's speaking directly to the Qedesha?
oh, absolutely, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. He's clearly speaking directly to them.
yeah.
You know,
By lying to my people, you have killed those who should not have died and spared those who should not live. I mean, that's clearly like a sign that they are capable of doing something, right? They've got real power in the society.
yeah. Well,
And
I mean, if
at the very least, they were probably telling the people to continue practicing the customs that had kept them fed and alive and trying to keep, turn them away from the influence of Yahweh. And that would be part of it because, if the people are still practicing paganism and they're living these agriculturally, this agricultural lives, then they are the ones who are going to continue to live and who are going to have what they need, versus those who aren't.
Yeah, the goddesses, they intercede in this life. I mean, so much Christianity is about transcendence into the afterlife and salvation in the afterlife. And, you wear a hair shirt in this life and don't enjoy yourself too much in this life so you can have, you don't want to sin in this life, otherwise you will be punished in the afterlife. But the goddess is not like that. The goddess intercedes in this life. She brings you not just like food and stuff to eat in this life, but she is like the Virgin Mary. So I watched this very interesting documentary that was talking about how the Virgin Mary traditions of the Catholic Church were used deliberately and very systematically to absorb goddess traditions all over Europe as they transition from paganism to Catholicism. And that they would deliberately, like, just literally rename the temples as Church of the Virgin Mary. And when they built new ones, they would replicate many of the same methodologies in terms of like the architecture of the building with these little alcoves where you could have your own personal prayers to the goddess, because the Virgin Mary intercedes in this life. you pray to the Virgin Mary so she can go talk to God who's way out there in outer space. But the Virgin Mary is right here. You can touch her. You can touch the Mother Goddess because she is the material world. And because she is nature, you can literally touch her. You can't touch God, but you can touch the Mother. And so she's right here. She's close at hand and personal and intimate with all of us. Um, and so that's enormously powerful. And then they want to get rid of that. So you just focus on the transcendent and the immaterial. Um,
I will
and
say
so,
that we have this really old, beautiful Gothic Catholic church here where I live downtown. Beautiful. And it still has the sacred space and the alcove for Mother Mary, the Virgin. And a lot of people go just to see her.
yeah, no, this documentary was all about how, like, just talking about how it was very systematic, that they very intentionally, um, he's calling it like the spiritual technologies in this documentary that they maintain the same spiritual technologies and just rename them, but they kept them because they work, and because they were very and they spoke to the human experience and the human condition and human psychological needs for these types of prayers, and so the Catholic Church was never able to get to pure monotheism. Really, they always kept this watered down goddess, and then you see the Muslims have the same fight in the Satanic Verses, and then when the Protestant Reformation comes along, they're very keen to get rid of the Mother Goddess. They're very keen to get rid. Big part of the Protestant Reformation is that they don't like the Virgin Mary. They say the Virgin Mary is just a just another pagan goddess. So the Protestants get rid of the Virgin Mary. She's very peripheral in Protestant traditions, where she's central in Catholic traditions.
Well,
Um,
and make no mistake, look what's happening right now in real time. It's the Protestant fundamentalists that have bought into the Zionist very ideology. That's, I mean, we're coming full circle here as they've gotten completely rid of the Virgin Mary or the goddess or the feminine. Um, and look at the destruction that we're watching in the name of
And get
this.
rid of Jesus too.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's
so
just
another
no respect for culture, no respect for women, no
no respect
respect
for life.
for life. It's truly a death cult. I mean,
Yeah, it's really unfortunate and terrifying what the Zionists are getting up to right now. It's a threat to all of us. Um, on a lighter note, though, one thing I noticed was this part about it's snaring people like birds, um,
Yeah.
and that reminded me of the Epic of Gilgamesh when he is talking to Ishtar or Inanna, um, and she's trying to seduce him, and he says, "Well, I don't want to go with you. You treat all your husbands terribly." And there's one of the, and he says, "Oh, the one, Dumuzi that you send down to the underworld every year, and the other one that there's a whole list of them that he's got. I don't remember off the top of my head. Of various lovers that Ishtar had that she in turn treats badly. And there's one about a bird, the one that you either break his wings or anyway, one of them it reminded me. I should look it up,
A Zuzu bird, or something like that.
something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Much as this is supposed to be like a threat, it doesn't sound like, I don't know, like I'm not afraid, you know?
of these guys.
Like if Yahweh said this to me, I'd be like, sure, okay, whatever, buddy. Like, and just go on about my business.
Well, I mean, you really see it in the Islamic world when the Taliban and these various types of Islamic fundamentalists come in. And you saw it, in just recent years when when the Taliban took over Afghanistan and like closed all the women's education and forced the women to wear the burqas and threw them out of their jobs and like forced them back into their houses because at different points, both in Iran too, prior to the 79 Islamic Revolution, Iran was a very secular country and women had loads of freedom, and were totally
Yep.
educated and very westernized and very secular. And that all got totally locked down under the Muslim, when the Islamic fundamentalists came in. Obviously, not all Muslims are like that, but when the Islamist fundamentalists came in and they follow this stuff to the T. Like, I mean, I that's what I'm always reminded of reading this is like when I see ISIS and Taliban, or like when I'm reading these stories, I think of ISIS and Taliban, how they come out of the mountains and snatch all the women and like turn them into sex slaves and stuff, and like all this horrible treatment of women that we're seeing in our contemporary world right now. That
Yeah.
is literally
Absolutely.
taken right from these pages and right from these examples.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should be very clear that these extreme versions of whether you want to call it Zionist or Islamic extremisms or Christian extremisms, it is very, all of them combined are very, when practiced fundamentally, is very much an insult and assaultive towards females and the goddess. There's no question about it.
Well, they feed each other. I mean, this is the thing that's come out
Mhm.
politically in recent years that, we now have like real proof of is that the Zionist fanatics are working with Al Qaeda and the ISIS fanatics
Yeah.
because they want the fanatics on the other side of the fight to justify them being nasty. And so, like, Netanyahu was funding Hamas the entire
Hamas.
time
Yeah.
so that he didn't have to make peace. He didn't want a reliable partner to make peace with among the Palestinians. Anyone that was like would have been a good partner for peace, they murdered him and put in charge complete extremist fanatics, so they would never have to make peace, would have the excuse to fight the war that they want. And so both sides benefit. The extremists on all sides, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, benefit from the extremists in the other religion. And so they're feeding each other. That's why the extremist Zionist Christians are feeding the Zionist Jews. They're funding the extremist Muslims, and that's a threat to all the rest of us. It's a threat to other Muslims. You know, it's only a small fraction of Muslims that are Islamists, but there's so many Muslims out there that a small fraction that are Islamists is still a lot of people. Um, so they're still large in absolute terms, and they're violent. And so,
Well,
um,
and they're politically motivated.
and
So even though you might have the mass people are very moderate and would never harm another person, it's these zealots in these religions that aspire for these political positions that have power, and then they influence the politics of it all that becomes violent. So most Muslims, I doubt, would be individually violent.
no,
It's when these more fundamentalists get into political power of these Muslims, they have enormous influence, and their cultural their cultural heritage seems to strangely justify it. I mean, and no one's, as it seems to me, like no one is free from blame here. But I don't know how these religions can, uh, you know, truly reconcile their past with their doctrines. How do you restore once the goddess has been murdered? How do you bring her back to life, and
well, this is why
without
I think it's
saying
so important. This is
without
why
saying you were been wrong?
I mean, I don't think. First of all, I don't think she's dead, and I think she totally thinks she's
And
coming back culturally, um, and this is why I want to work on this stuff because I actually think it's really important culturally, um, as a counterweight. I think I think we're entering wars of religion in the 21st century, and that the Mother Goddess is part of the battle. She's one of the characters in the drama. We don't know how the drama is going to turn out, but it ain't just about the Jews, Christians, and Muslims. The Mother Goddess has got a role to play in all of this dispute, and um, she's got a response to all of this. It's so telling that the women just never get a voice in these books in the Bible.
yeah,
They're castigating them constantly, endlessly, um, and they almost never speak, um, and they certainly never speak when they're being criticized like this in these parts that we're getting into now. And I think that's just so telling that it's also such a one-sided presentation.
That's how history is written, right? By those in power who take away the voices of those without power, and they control the narrative. But I'm going to also say, Yes, the goddess has never died. She has always been here. And I mean, you said yourself, Ed, that, they took Mother Mary and tried to like kind of adopt her to get converts, and so that certain practices and so on could be converted over into Catholicism or what have you. But like, she has always found a way. And even if she was divorced, even if she was stripped of everything, she really wasn't, because the seasons are still there. So the Sabbaths have always been there. And the people who live an agricultural life, they may not have had like their festivals, but they probably were still having festivals. They were still honoring that cycle of nature. The moon is always going to do what the moon
Yeah.
does.
These are evergreen traditions that people keep
Y-
Yeah.
finding their way back to. For sure. I
yes,
mean, and we know that European paganism never went away. We know that there were pagan colonists in the 1600s. We've got we've got we've got their testimony. So Mother Earth stuff never went away. The church never stopped complaining about it all through medieval times. Um, and nature-based traditions are just so organic, right? Or just so intuitive that you keep finding your way back to them. And then the other part of it is that the plants speak to us. I mean, like there's other sources of knowledge.
really.
We're not just limited to what people tell us and what we learn from school, because I learned so much. So much of what I've learned has been a plant medicine journey since I was 17 years old. And I've been listening to plants all along and like not really doing school, all that. I went to good schools, but I didn't really like do it by the rules. And so, because I was always listening to the plants and like they were always teaching me something that I wasn't learning in school. And that's how I arrived here. Was like, and I know there's other people on this journey too. I know I'm not alone in this. I know I'm not. Nothing I'm saying is all that unique or really all that original. I don't really think there's original ideas. I think ideas are quantum, and multiple people have the same ideas, and ideas are entangled across time and space, and that there's other people having these ideas too, and other people are finding their way to this stuff as well. I know I'm not alone. I found you guys. Um,
Yeah.
so anyway, we're at an hour 20. Maybe it's a good time to knock it off, unless anyone's got anything they want to finish up with.
No, this is just really interesting, and it it also, unfortunately, affirms my lived experience
Yeah,
as a woman in
sure.
this society, and the way that the narratives, and the indoctrination, like the actual effects of that. Um, and I think it's coming to like some sort of a head where it's become even more violent and toxic, and I think we're seeing that, playing out. And but it's interesting to hear more about how that plays out in the Bible, and to understand that that's why so many people believe. And it just, yeah. So I just wanted to say that it affirms my unfortunate,
Yeah, in a
this
sad way. It
unfortunate
affirms
lived
it
experience.
affirms some sad stuff, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I think this has been for me, and why I think part of what I really enjoy about this Goddess Bible study is like unearthing the origins of slut shaming, such that in all the rest of this, all this misogyny, all this sort of like systemic misogyny, um, and slut shaming that has been such dominant in our culture, and sexual shaming that's been so dominant in our culture, and to unearth, and same thing with the trans people, that the Kadesh only being mentioned when they're being chased away. But the fact they're being mentioned at all shows that they were there. And so we see the origins of like LGBTQ being shoved under a rock. Um, and I, I, I do hope at some point people this will get through to the broader culture a little bit, because I do think we're digging into some stuff that is relevant to the culture debate that's being had right now. And so unfortunately, it's very noisy in today's cultural
Well,
debate.
I think a lot of these things are symptoms of this monotheistic imbalance, and we've discussed this maybe to ad nauseum in the past. But a lot of these things that we're struggling with is strictly because this is the blowout from believing in this archetype. I mean, think about if you're made in the image and likeness of God, and that is the belief system, and that God is male. Well, then there's no room for women. Sorry.
Right.
I mean, if we can just say it as matter of factly as that, just very simple, not get into the
That's the writing.
scholarship, and just, if you can just, I think we can all basically agree upon that. If God is male and we're made in his image and likeness, then women are an accident. Sorry, we just have to put up with you. I mean, that is the culture that we're in, and it's obviously very wrong.
Theism thing is the original psyop.
Totally.
Totally.
It totally is. In all of its forms, even in the very spiritual all is one thing, I really think that this needs to be delicately investigated and felt out for all of its, if it becomes an archetype too, what does that mean? Say that if everything is one, if there is no room for anything else, what does that, it might not be exactly like a monotheistic male god, but what does it turn into? What culture does that turn into? If you take gender out of the equation. Maybe that's right, but let's investigate it. Let's have a discussion about it, instead of just accepting it whole cloth.
Mm. Well, this is always interesting. I always appreciate our time together and the things we discuss and everything I learn along the way. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, everybody.
Lisa and Joshua, for participating, and thank you for anyone that's still listening. LostGoddess.io for Substack for the write-ups, and next week we'll be jumping back into the Book of Kings. We'll pick up the destruction of Israel by the Assyrians and King Hezekiah, getting to some of the reformer kings. So we'll be getting into these prophets. So more good stuff coming. Thank you guys for taking part. Appreciate you very much.